Okay, so this week we have two different topics we will cover. One of them is prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping. This is itself is actually a very wide topic, but I will try to summarize it as briefly as I can to make the videos shorter so that you can actually concentrate on what we're talking. So, first we need to define our concepts. Okay, so in psychology, we usually use these three different dimensions to analyze anything. We focus on cognition, how we think, we focus on emotion, how we feel, and we focus on behavior, so how we act, how we behave. Okay, so when we say prejudice, stereotype, and discrimination, we actually are talking about all of these dimensions, because prejudice is more like an emotional thing. Okay, ön yargı in Turkish, although it says yargı, it is more than cognition. It is more like emotion. For example, you don't like, I don't know, if you have a prejudice against black people, let's say, and you say, well, I don't like black people. This is just a feeling, and I don't really like them, or I hate them, maybe even. Okay, so in that case, that's a prejudice. Okay, so it's an overall feeling. Okay, and overall not liking certain people. But stereotype, kalıp yargı in Turkish, it's more cognitive, because in stereotype you're talking about your beliefs about certain people. For example, when you say Arabs are lazy, okay, so you're overgeneralizing. Okay, so and stereotypes are usually not true. Okay, so they're incorrect, they're overgeneralizations, but there are certain beliefs about people. For example, or when you say, for example, women cannot really drive cars. Okay, so that's a stereotype. That's a negative stereotype. Stereotypes could be positive as well, which I will come to that later on during this class. But most of the stereotypes are negative. So there are negative beliefs about certain people, and they are usually not true. They're not supported by any evidence, and they're usually overgeneralization. Because why do I say overgeneralization? Because you cannot find any belief that actually applies to every single member of a group. That's usually practically not possible. For example, even if you say, for example, I don't know, Greeks are lazy, for example, okay? So I'm not saying it's true, but even if it is true that, let's say, Greeks are relatively, on average, relatively more lazy than Turkish people on average, for example. Even if it is true, it doesn't mean that it is the case for every Greek person or every Turkish person, right? There are very hardworking Greeks and there are very lazy Turkish people. So even if the generalization is true, it doesn't apply to every single individual. But before coming to that, the generalization itself is not usually true. There is no difference even between the average scores. Okay, so, and discrimination in Turkish ayrımcılık is the behavioral part. Okay, now you're acting on your prejudice and this stereotype, and you are discriminating against people. For example, when you say, well, you are black and you cannot enter this restaurant, that's discrimination. Okay, or when you say, well, you're Muslim, so I'm not hiring you for this job, that's discrimination. Or when you say, well, you're atheist, you cannot marry my daughter, for example, that's discrimination. Okay, so it should involve an act of behavior. So you're discriminating against certain people. Of course, this discrimination is always fed by this emotional and cognition part. So why do I discriminate? Because I have these prejudices and stereotypes. So Actually, before I've already summarized, I kind of accidentally skipped the slides. But as I said, let's go back. There's no harm in repeating. There is negative attitude towards a certain group and its members. Okay, so you know, what is attitude? Attitude is an overall evaluation of something. Okay, so when you have a negative attitude, it means that I don't really like, or I hate, depending on its extent. Okay, so you might have prejudices against prejudices based on race, gender, ethnicity, religion, ideology, you name it. For example, in this scene from one moment from an interview with a Syrian immigrant in Turkey, for example, the voice is saying, "İnsanlar Suriyelileri sevmiyor." So people do not like Syrians. So that means that you perceive to be exposed to prejudice. You think that other people have prejudices against you. Okay, but this feeling part is more what we talk about prejudice. Okay, stereotype, on the other hand, as I said, certain beliefs, and they're overgeneralizing. They're far from truth. They're not true, and they are usually resistant to counter evidence. Okay, what does this mean? Resistance to counter evidence. For example, even if you, for example, provide evidence that contradicts with someone's stereotype. For example, let's say you say that Syrian people are not very intelligent. Okay, let's say that's your stereotype. Okay, then I bring someone with me and I say, meet Hassan, for example. I don't know, he's Syrian and he's very smart. You can talk to him and talk about anything. Then let's say you talk to that person and you really realize that that person is really, really intelligent, okay? But that usually does not change people's stereotype automatically. Because you say that, okay, yes, I agree that Hassan is very intelligent, but that's just an exception, right? It's not, okay? It doesn't change the fact that Syrians on average are not very intelligent. This is just one person, okay? So then maybe you bring 10 other people as well, or 20 or 50. Maybe you can weaken the stereotype, but these counter evidences do not usually automatically change people's minds. And for example, one example here, again, from the Syrian example, it says Suriyeli mülteciler suç oranını patlattı. Bunlar için 15.000 polis alınacak. Okay, so from the language, you actually sense first the feeling, right? There's the prejudice. There's obviously whoever wrote this headline title for this news article obviously have some negative sentiments about Syrian immigrants. It's very easily perceivable. And also it says that Suriyeli mülteci, so the existence of Syrian immigrants increased the number of crimes in Turkey. Well, but when you look at the actual crime statistics, it is not the case, right? It is not the case. Actually, when people are immigrants in a country, they usually actively try to refrain from engaging in any criminal activity because they know that they are not actually, they can be sent away, right? If they do anything, even a very tiny minor crime, okay, if that minor crime is conducted by a citizen of that country, there wouldn't be any problem. But if you do it, they can easily send you back to your original country. Because of that fear, usually, not only in Turkey, but all around the world, immigrants are very afraid of dealing with the police or the criminal system. And when you look at the statistics in Turkey, this is not the case. But even if you, for example, provide the statistics and numbers, you can easily change people's minds, right? Because then they will say, well, that's because, I don't know, the government or the state agency is protecting Syrian immigrants, so they're actually hiding the real numbers. That's why you don't see that, etc., etc. That's the thing about conspiracy theories as well, for example. it's not the same thing, stereotyping, conspiracy theories, but the commonality is even if you prove that your idea is wrong, people usually do not just immediately change their mind. And discrimination is unjustifiable negative behavior toward a group and its members. So you should be negatively behaving negatively towards someone, and it should be unjustifiable, because some negative behaviors could be justifiable, right? I don't know. Let's say you have a classmate, okay, and that classmate has a Nazi tattoo on his arm, okay, and you see that, and then you stop talking to that person, okay, so that's negative attitude, right? And not only attitude, but in your behavior as well, you stop talking, or maybe you kind of criticize that person in the class, so you behaved negatively towards that person, okay, so that's negative behavior, but it is justifiable, right? Because that person declares that he is racist and he's advocating for racism, so fighting against that is not unjustifiable, okay? But what is unjustifiable is that, for example, you discriminate someone based on his or her skin color, or ethnicity, okay, or language, or religion, religious belief or disbelief, okay? So if you discriminate against them, these are not justified, because this is normal diversity, right? People come from different backgrounds, and this is not, no background is objectively good or bad, right? These are just cultural differences, and it is perfectly okay. So this is, for example, I'm going with the Syrian examples. This is, for example, the discrimination part. It says, İran, Suriye, Afgan müşteri bu iş yerine giremez, alışveriş yapamaz. Girerse bu mekanda dayak yer. Kişiler bu iş yerine girerse dayak yer. So if you're Syrian, Iranian, or Afghan, and if you enter this store, so it says that you cannot enter this store, and if you do, we will beat you up. Okay, so this is blatant discrimination. This is openly, there is no question whether this is discrimination or not, right? Just because you're from a certain background, they say that you cannot enter the store. This is actually very similar to what Black people went through in the United States throughout early 20th century, right? So they were saying that, well, Blacks cannot enter this school, Blacks cannot enter this restaurant, etc. So, but it is very sad to see these kind of things in 2015, 16, 17, or 18, I don't remember the date, but very recently in Turkey. It means that we are still not there. We're still struggling with our racism. And there's this, unfounded acceptance as well. People usually say, bizde ırkçılık olmaz, Turkish people are not racist. Well, I disagree, and actually all the evidence that you can see, people can, I'm not saying that Turkish people are more racist or less racist or whatever, but there are definitely some people who are blatantly racist, and this is only one example, okay? And we should always be, we shouldn't ignore this problem by saying that there is no racism, but we should be aware of this so that we can actually tackle this problem. We can actually fight against this problem. And these biases, this is discriminations, blah, blah, blah, are also could be categorized into different categories. One of them, the most open one, so the examples that I show you, especially the last photograph, was blatant. Blatant means very open, right? There is no hiding, okay? You're very openly racist, for example. So old-fashioned biases, let me pull this video here. I don't know if it changes with you. So old-fashioned biases were very blatant. Okay, so for example, people back then, in decades ago, they were openly saying that they were racist, right? They were openly saying that black people cannot do this, cannot do that. They were not trying to hide it. And these are very conscious feelings, beliefs, or behaviors, and people usually admit having them. They do not deny that they are racist. They agree that they are racist, and they are express hostility towards certain people. So blatant racism is, as the title says, is kind of old-fashioned, because it's all, newer kind of, more recent kind of biases are more subtle or are more implicit, which I will come to that in a minute. People are not usually very openly racist or very openly discriminating in today's world, but it doesn't mean that just because it is more like old-fashioned, it doesn't mean that there are no blatant biases in today's world, because there are. For example, this photograph, I don't know if you remember, but 1 or maybe 2 years ago, there was this shooting in New Zealand. This guy in the photograph at the top went into a mosque and started killing people randomly. And just because they were Muslims, okay? So, and he admitted that he killed them just because they were Muslims. So that's kind of the proof that there's a blatant bias and discrimination. And also there was this moment during his trial which became hot news and talked about a lot. So he did this gesture in the photograph as well. Okay, so this is usually what this means in a lot of cultures. It means okay, right? When you say that's yes, we're done. Okay, something like that. Especially American people do this a lot. So, but there is this new development that this neo-Nazis, let's say, or new waves of racism, or that sometimes they call it alt-right, for example. Maybe you've heard the concept alt-right. It means it stands for alternative rights, okay? But which means that these people are rightists, but not in the traditional sense. That's why they call themselves alt-right. Why are not rightists in the traditional sense? Because they are more blatantly and more openly discriminating against people. And this is one of their signs, hand gestures, okay? And this stands for, this 3 fingers stands for W, okay, white, okay? And as you see in the picture, when you do it, when you do it like this, okay? So this is also stands for P, okay? So WP stands for white power, okay? So that's what the gesture comes from. In the picture, it does this because maybe he couldn't do it. He couldn't do this because of the kelepçe, I don't know the name, okay? So white power means that white people are superior than all the others, and they should once again regain their privileges and rights, okay? So it shows that even today's world, there are blatantly racist and discriminating people. Of course, not only towards Muslims. Sometimes Muslim people kill non-Muslims, Christians, for example, just because they're Christians, right? Or atheists, they execute atheists just because they're atheists in certain countries. Or Jewish people openly discriminate against Muslims, or the other way around, sometimes in other countries, blah, blah. There are all kinds of millions of these combinations, and they still exist. But overall, on average, people usually show their biases at more implicit senses. Implicit means örtük, okay, hidden. So Before coming to that more implicit forms, I will talk about some examples, let's say, that can be given to more old-fashioned biases. One of them is social dominance orientation, sosyal baskınlık yönelimi. Okay, so if you have a high score in social dominance orientation, it means that you perceive the inequalities in the society as normal. Okay, so in all societies, there are some forms of inequality, right? Some of them more unequal, some of them are more egalitarian, but no society is completely egalitarian. There is always kind of hierarchy, even if it's a minor hierarchy. Okay? So if you see that hierarchy and you think that it is justifiable and it is normal, then it means that you have a high social dominance orientation. For example, you say that rich people are rich, poor people are poor, and that's normal. Okay, because rich people are more intelligent, more hardworking. That's why they deserve to be richer, for example. Okay, so that's the characteristic of social dominance orientation. And when you perceive this inequalities as normal, you usually use something called legitimizing myths, meşrulaştırıcı mitler. Okay, so the example I just gave, for example, when you say rich people are rich, poor people are poor, because rich people are more intelligent, hardworking, that's a meşrulaştırıcı myth, legitimizing myth. You are rationalizing, explaining why there is an inequality, okay? Or when you say, for example, there are more male members of parliament, milletvekili, in the parliament than there are female parliament member of parliaments, for example, okay? There are more male members than female in the parliament. And if you think that this is normal, and it should be this way, okay, that's high social dominance orientation. And then you usually try to also justify this, rationalize it. And then they will say, well, women are okay, but they should be more like taking care of the housework and be a good mother and leave the politics to men, for example, okay, because men are better at this kind of stuff. That's legitimizing myths, okay? And these legitimizing myths are usually myths, meaning they're just stories, they're not true, but just because people believe in them makes a difference in society, because people believe that men should be doing this, women should be doing this, and because of their belief, they act accordingly, which creates a gender inequality, for example. And these myths could be hierarchy enhancing or attenuating. Hierarchy enhancing means increasing the hierarchy, okay? So makes it even more unequal, okay? Hierarchy attenuating means decreasing the hierarchy, making it more egalitarian, okay? Certain legitimizing myths are hierarchy enhancing. For example, these pictures are from a fair in Paris before World War II. Before World War II was erupted, there was this fair, foire, okay, in Paris. And at the time, these fairs were a huge deal. People actually paid attention to this huge touristic attraction. And in Paris, as a memorial, these two statues were built for that fair, okay? The one on the left is built by the Nazi Germany, okay, and the eagle symbolizes the Nazi ideology. The one on the right, as you can understand from the Orak Çekiç, etc., is built by the Soviet Union, okay? So these two statues symbolizes very different ideologies, right? So one of them, the one on the left, the Nazi ideology, is obviously hierarchy enhancing, right? Because it says that German people are superior than others, for example. The one on the right, although in practice whether it worked or not is a matter of another discussion, but in theory they say that, well, everyone should be equal, right? We should abolish the capitalists, everyone should be proletariat, everyone should be working class, everyone should be equal. So in theory, they are trying to attenuate the myths. Of course, it doesn't have to be this kind of Nazi versus communism, but you can give another example for hierarchy attenuating myth. For example, you can say feminism, right? Because feminism is trying to balance males and females' privileges and rights, and they're trying to make them equal, which makes it a hierarchy attenuating myth. So, and another one is right, and other than social dominance orientation, another form of more blatant, more open bias is right-wing authoritarianism. Sağ kanat yetkiciliği in Turkish. Okay, so there are three main factors. One of aggression, conventionalism, and submission. So in right-wing authoritarianism, first of all, you are very conventional, traditional. Okay, so you stick up with the norms, traditions of society, very gelenekçi. Okay, and you're aggressive towards people who are violating your traditions, norms, who are behaving not according to the conventions of the society, etc., and you're aggressive towards them. And you think that submitting, obeying the authority figures, those authority figures are usually the president of the country, the kind of other directors, bosses, müdürler, bureaucratlar, blah, blah. Okay, whoever the authority figure is, you should be submitting to that person. You should obey and respect the authority figure. So these three are main pillars of right-wing authoritarianism. So right-wing authoritarian people are very traditional. Okay, they think that if there's an authority figure, my duty is to obey that authority figure. And if someone is not obeying, that I should be punishing, or the state authority figure should be punishing that person. I took some sample items from the questionnaire that is used to measure right-wing authoritarianism. For example, if you agree with the statement that what our country really needs is a strong, determined leader who will crush evil and take us back to our free path, then if you agree with this statement, that's a sign of right-wing authoritarianism. Or there is nothing wrong with premarital sexual intercourse. Premarital sexual intercourse means evlilik öncesi cinsel ilişki. So if you, now this is a reverse item, so if you disagree with this, then you say, well, I think there is a problem with premarital sexual intercourse. And if I say that, then that's again a sign of right-wing authoritarianism, because it means that I'm very traditional, conventional. And the third example item is obedience and respect for authority are the most important virtues children should learn. If you're agreeing with this, then it means that you have a high score in submission, and you also automatically have a higher score in right-wing authoritarianism. So certain characteristics of right-wing authoritarian people: low right-wing means that you are not authoritarian. Okay, so certain characteristics: favoring individual freedom, personal autonomy, social diversity, sosyal çoğulculuk, social novelty, yeni şeylere açıklık sosyal hayatta, change and innovation. Okay, so for example, Obama, I will use some American examples. Same-sex, for example, Obama, when he was the president, he said that same-sex couples should be able to get married. So this is a sign of right-wing low right-wing authoritarianism. Why? Because you are not, first of all, very traditional. Even if same-sex couples are not very traditional couples, you're accepting them, you're accepting this change, you're accepting this social novelty. You're saying that, well, I am not gay myself, but I am. I think that gay people should have this right. So you are advocating social diversity, so everyone should have their own rights, and I shouldn't be interfering with them, etc. So that's the sign of low right-wing authoritarianism. But the current president, Donald Trump, for example, he says, I am for traditional marriage. So what he means that, heterosexual couples are the traditional make the traditional marriage. So he supports them and he says this is the normal kind of marriage and the other ones should be we should stay away. Okay, so this is now a high right-wing authoritarianism example. And people who have high right-wing authoritarianism, they have beliefs and attitudes that favor maintaining traditional socially conservative values, muhafazakar değerler, conservative lifestyles, morality, ahlak, religious beliefs, respect and obedience for established laws. For example, kanundur uyacaksın, otoriteye uyacaksın. That kind of attitude, norms and authorities, strict, tough, and punitive social control. Okay, so if you have to use force, then you should use it. And if you're agreeing with this, then it's a sign of high right-wing authoritarianism. But 20th century biases are more subtle. Okay, subtle means gizli, örtük, not very easily visible. Okay, so one is, for example, automatic biases. Okay, so implicit biases, which means that well, I have this prejudice in my mind, but even I am not aware of this 100%. This is more kind of unconscious prejudice. What do I mean by this? I'll come to that in a minute. There are more ambiguous biases, means that I don't really, it's not that I dislike other groups, but because I really like my group, it automatically creates a difference between my in-group and out-group, which can lead to discrimination in the long run. And there are also ambivalent stereotypes, means that they're not black or white, but there are more gray areas of stereotypes. Because as I said a few minutes ago at the beginning of the class, there are also sometimes positive stereotypes as well. And sometimes towards certain group, you can have both positive and negative stereotypes at the same time, which kind of makes things complicated. I'll come to that later on. Automatic biases as implicit prejudices, okay? So if you want to know how we actually measure this, you can go to, and I strongly suggest you to do it, you can go to implicit.harvard.edu, okay? So when you go there, select Turkish language or English, up to you, okay? So you can skip this part. These are just informed consent. And now you select the topic to test whether you have an implicit prejudice on this domain or not, okay? So I don't know, let's say I select Yash, okay? You can select whatever you want. So you should first read this. I skipped that because I already know what it means. So now it says, on the left side, it says genç, and on the right side, it says yaşlı. Okay, based on this photograph, I should select whether it is genç or yaşlı. If it is genç, I push the left button, which is E in this case, or I button, which is right. Okay, so left, left, left, left, left, left, right, left, right, left, left, right, right, left, right, right, right, right, right, right. So, and also I should be doing this as fast as possible. That's the whole deal about this topic. Now, there will be certain words, okay? And if they're a bad word, I will push the left button. And if they're a good word, I will push the right as fast as possible, okay? Left, left, left, left, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, right, right, right. So, okay. Now, this first two runs were actually just practice. It didn't test my prejudice. It just kind of, they were a training for the real deal. Okay, the real deal starts now. So sometimes randomly, sometimes in the center there will be a photograph, sometimes there will be a word. Okay, so when it's a photograph, if it's a young person, okay, according to these instructions, I should push the left button. If it's an old person, right button. But sometimes it will not be a photograph, but it will be a word, for example. If it is a bad word, I should push left. If it's a good word, I should push right. Okay, so that's, if you read the instructions, that's what it says. Okay, let's see. So right, left, right, right, left, right, left, sorry, left. As you can see, my reactions got a little bit slower, obviously, because it got more complicated. Right, right, left, left, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, left, right, left, right. Okay. Now, I'm not going to do all the ones because it takes a while, but I suggest you do everything. Okay. What I will talk about instead, that what this really measures. Okay. So as you can see, I sometimes made some errors. Okay. Let's say when you reverse these categories, let's say if it says genç veya iyi, okay, so young or good on the left side, and yaşlı veya kötü, black and or bad on the right side. Okay, so if the categories were reversed. So let's say in that case, if I made less errors, or if I made more quick and correct responses, okay, then it would mean that I actually have an implicitly negative attitude towards older people. Why? Because when good and young are grouped together and old and bad are grouped together, if my reactions start becoming faster and more correct, then it means that these are actually, in my mind, are naturally categorized each other. I find it more normal that genç and iyi are grouped together and yaşlı and kötü. But when you reverse the categories, my reactions got a little bit slower. Okay, I start making more errors because these categories confuse me, because I implicitly think that young people are good and old people are bad, for example. Okay, so that's how they measure. And you can try this on any other dimension. So why do we care about whether people have implicit biases or not? Because sometimes, for example, let's say you enter a classroom, okay, so there's this black person sitting, and if you just, and there are a whole bunch of chairs next to him, okay, and sometimes you choose the farthest away, en uzak chair to sit, okay, but if it was a white person, if you sit relatively closer, it means that you might have this implicitly negative attitude towards black people, and you kind of try to stay away from them. Okay, and if I ask you, do you have a negative prejudice towards black people, and you say no, I don't, but you implicitly, unconsciously actually behave that way. Okay, that's why implicit attitudes are important. Ambiguous biases, as I said, it's not that I hate others, but it's kind of from other mechanisms. For example, social identity theory says that we usually tend to have very positive attitudes towards our in-group, the groups that we belong to. If I think that my group is kind of very good, it automatically makes other groups relatively worse, right? That's the logic. They cannot be equal, because if all groups are equal, what makes my group good, for example? Okay, in order to say that my group is better or good, there should be some other groups that are bad. Okay, so which kind of indirectly leads to prejudice. And there's something called aversive racism as well. Aversive means kaçıngan, okay? So persistence, avoidance of interaction with other racial and ethnic groups. Now, you're not discriminating against them. You're not doing anything bad to them, but instead you kind of don't talk to them. You don't make black friends, for example, or you don't spend time in different neighborhoods. So you don't spend time with them. You refrain from spending time. You don't go and say negative things to them, but instead you don't say anything. You don't talk. Okay, so that's a form of aversive racism. And the last thing that I will talk about in this chapter, then I will move on to the next chapter, is stereotype content model. Okay, now, and this is an example of ambivalent biases, as I said. So stereotype content model says that stereotypes are based on two different dimensions. One of them is warmth, sıcaklık, okay? How much do you think certain people are warm, sıcakkanlı people, okay? So that's one dimension. Competence is beceri. How much certain people are intelligent or competent, they can get things done, those kinds of beliefs, okay? So you can have, and on both those two dimensions, you can have high warmth, low warmth, high competence, low competence stereotypes, which makes then 4 different categories of stereotypes actually, okay? For example, you can have high warmth, but if you follow the mouse here, the one on the left here, high warmth, but low competence people in your mind, obviously, okay? For example, disabled people, engelliler, okay? People usually have positive stereotypes about them based on warmth. They think that they are sıcakkanlı, very good people, very good natured, etc., etc. But at the same time, people also have low competence stereotypes. They think that they are not as competent as other people. And if I want to hire someone to my company, I wouldn't choose someone who is disabled, for example. And that's a high warmth, low competence, okay? Stereotype. And that usually comes with the feeling of pity, acımak, okay? So when you feel pity towards someone, you think that that person, you empathize with that person, you think that that person is warm, good person, but at the same time, you kind of think that that person is kind of inferior than you, okay? And you can have, again, high warmth and also high competence stereotypes as well. So you think that these people are warm and also very competent as well. For example, usually that's in-group members for people, okay? So for, I don't know, I'm just making this up right now. So for Turkish people, okay, let's say Azeri people could be in that category, okay? Or other allies, other kind of very close contact people. Okay, then you can have low warmth and low competence stereotype as well, okay? So, for example, it says homeless people, evsizler, okay? So you think that they are not to be trusted, for example, if that is a stereotype, they are not to be trusted. They're not very good-natured people. They're lazy. They're hideous. Blah blah blah. There are all kinds of these kinds of stuff. I'm not saying these are true, just a stereotype. And at the same time, you think that they also have low competence as well. Okay, and there are also the 4th category, that low warmth but high competence. Now, you don't really trust these people. You're not thinking that they are very good people in their hearts, but at the same time, you think that they're very successful and they're very competent as well. The most obvious and universal example for this category is usually Jewish people, right? So in a lot of countries, there's a negative stereotype towards Jewish people, saying that they are not to be trusted, they are not very good people at their heart, etc., etc. But at the same time, people usually also think that they are secretly running the world. They are owning the majority of the companies. They are coordinating everything that happens in the world, etc., etc. That's also an assumption that they are very competent as well. Okay, so these kind of mixed stereotypes might happen. Now I'm going to stop there, and the next video will be about the next chapter, aggression and violence.